Hi, my name's Chris and welcome to my cellar. I'm not sure if you can see the wire in shot. I haven't advanced myself to Bluetooth microphone connection, so please excuse that. But today I want to talk about a bit of a problem. You know, in a previous post, or maybe a post to come, I guided you around the cellar, so I'm not going to do that again. But as burgeoning as it is and as fulsome, you know, I've never had as much wine in my cellar, and I'm hugely grateful for that, and I've enjoyed curating it immensely. But actually what I've discovered in doing so is that I actually have a bit of a problem. Now, it's very much a first world problem, but it's a bit of a problem nonetheless. If you can just come in here. So let's take the Rhone as an example here. And this is not the worst part of what I'm talking about. But here we've got a couple of 3 bottles of 2005 Rhone. Then we jump to 2010s and 12s. And everything beneath that there, you can see 12s. That's Saint Cosme 2013, going right down to the Alain Vosges 2015, and in fact at the very bottom, Alain Vosges 2017. So in other words, with some notable exceptions, all of these wines are well under 10 years old. Now, when we come over here to the South Africa Australian rack, you can see that the problem gets even worse. We've got a good notable exception there, a lovely Magnum of Merlus from 2012. But you know, you can see beside it there, 2015. We go down to Merlus 16s and 17s. On down a bit, you're into Warwick 15s and 17s. Here we've got the Kershaw, which I think is a 15, and so on and so forth. A couple of notable exceptions down here would be a lovely 2005 Cullen Diane Madeleine, and there are 1 or 2 Penfolds going back 10 years there. So what is the point I'm making here? Well, what I've discovered when curating and filling up this cellar is something that was really rammed home to me pre-Christmas. Very good friend of mine, very knowledgeable South African wine lover, who many of you will know. I try not to use names on the video, so forgive me there. But he was wondering about the drinking windows of his South African wines, which historically he'd always said, drink them young. You know, drink them within 5 years. You know, they'll kind of peak and start to tail off, even the reds after 5 years. And as the South African wine industry has developed in the last 10 to 15 years, you know, I think he's realized, and we've all realized, that's not really the case anymore. These things are built to last, and they do last much longer than 5 years. So we reached out to a number of vintners in South Africa and winemakers and asked them, you know, I own, I don't know, 3 cases of your wine. Please tell me what you think the best drinking window is. And from one of the winemakers, he got back a cracking piece of advice, which was, you know, I can't tell you when to drink your wine because, you know, as wine ages, it starts with primary flavors. So that's your fruit forward, you know, maybe quite sharp tannins and acidity. And then if you wait a period of time, then to the midlife of the wine, you're getting into the secondary flavors. So a little bit more kind of savory notes and that kind of forest floor notes, sort of a rounding out and a softening of the fruits. And then you wait till they're old wines, you know, relative to their own length. And you get into the tertiary, the 3rd level of flavors. And that really is just that kind of you know, inside of a barrel, or that kind of rustiness. You know, the fruits have really died away and you're left with just something different. It's the essence of the fruits and a definite sense of age. And that's just choice. You know, do you like your wines young and perky? Do you like them in their midlife when they're maybe at their best developed and most rounded? Or do you just love that kind of, you know, ethereal taste of something that's just older than you are? And the response he got from this winemaker was, listen, I'll give you a guide, you know, and that's to say that for white wines, you know, I really think you should be drinking white wines. They will start to peak depending on the wine. Some are built to be drunk immediately, very young. This Albarino would be a good example of that. But white wines generally, they're going to start reaching their peak at sort of 5-6 years old. And even certain types of white wines, such as these German Rieslings or the Austrian Grüne Veltliner, you can drink them within 2 years of the vintage, of their being bottled, but then they'll go to sleep. And if you drink them, say, between 2 and 6 or 2 and 7 years, you'll be disappointed. But then they wake up and they develop a new and more intense flavour from sort of year 6 onwards. So that's kind of a good rule of thumb for your white wines. But what this gentleman was saying from South Africa in the red wines was that he says, regardless of whether it's South African red or US Pinot or Bordeaux or whatever it is, you can really bank on a well-built, well-created red wine starting to reach its plateau of peak drinking at about 10 years old. And that'll run, depending on the wine, till it's 15 years old, and then it might start to taper off. If you're talking Bordeaux, you'd maybe even slide it. You start drinking at 12 to 15 years old, and that peak will go on until it's sort of 20, even longer years old. So the problem, as you can see, that I'm facing in the cellar is all these wines, the vast majority of these wines are well under a decade old. 2015 Merlot, 2012 Chateau Beaucostel. Moving over to the German Rieslings, with the exception of a 12, the oldest I have is 15, so that's still only 5 years old for 30, 40 bottles of wine. Same on the Alsace side. Same on the Rioja, mostly far too young. And so the perfectly created cellar that I have got in front of me actually really leaves me with a bit of a problem, because I come down here, I want to be able to pick any of these wines to drink, but actually most of them aren't ready. So here we are back on the right hand side of the cellar, and I think this is probably what has brought all of this sort of thinking to the front of my mind, has been in the creation and starting to drink these Italian reds. I can't remember which one it was, but I was drinking some, I've got 12 and 13 here of the Barolos, and I started drinking, I think it was 2012's last year, and they were just a mess. They're huge tannins, huge acidity, not very well integrated, the type of stuff that you would kind of drink and cringe a bit. And in fact, I bought, not an expensive one, but the Wine Society's Exhibition Barolo from 2016, because 16 is an epic Italian vintage, and I thought I'll try this, and if I think it's lovely, I'll go back and buy more. I had to put half the bottle into the spaghetti bolognese because I just didn't enjoy drinking it. And what it really rammed home to me was, here I've got sort of 60, 70 Italian wines, and there's about 2 of them that are actually in their drinking window. Now, how did I get there? We can contrast it with the Bordeaux, and in the Bordeaux, I think there are 2 things that have made it easier to stay on top of things. Number one is that they're much more en primeur. That's the traditional market of en primeur has been your French wines. So you're almost, and that's why I've ended up with an overloaded French wines in my cellar, is because that's when you can buy wines for the future, is through these early offers. And until recently, those en primeur things haven't been available. So it's been less in your face and less easy for you to go, I'll buy some of that for 10 years time. I'll buy some of that for 5 years time. It's only really been possible in the French. Now I'm delighted to say that's starting to change. But the second reason I think it's been easy here, difficult here, is actually great vintages. So I've focused on the Bordeaux side. I've got 2001, 3, 4, 5, 9, 10, 16 are the ones that come to mind. Most of the wines in here will be from those vintages, and it means that I haven't had to buy every vintage or I'd be bankrupt, but also they've come along, those good vintages, every 2, 3, 4 years. So you're constantly sort of cultivating and building up your cellar with a good selection of wines that will just come off the conveyor belt, that 10 to 15 years later. It wasn't the case really in Italy, I think certainly in the noughties, and so I just found that I've got none there to drink. And it's only been in the teens with the 12s, 13s, 16s and 15s that the vintages have been good enough to be worth buying, but also I think in has come the en primeur capability to actually buy it. So how do I pull this all together? Well, I think it's try and, if you're interested in wine and you're trying to build up a cellar, try not to miss years of en primeur vintages. increasingly you can get them from all over the world. You know, you can get a Penfolds en primeur, you can get a Merlust en primeur, you can get Italian en primeurs, as well as all of the French ones, even Rioja en primeurs these days, and pick in a year which have had a great vintage, and then just whatever you can afford, just grab 6 bottles or 3 bottles of that great vintage and put it away. And try and for the wines that don't come in en primeur, really spend a bit of time, you know, looking. So a good example would be right underneath the camera there, the US Pinots. I'm not aware that you can get those en primeur in the UK, so you've got to kind of do the legwork yourself. And I've started to curate a US section, but the youngest one in there is 2015. So despite my healthy cellar, it covers over the cracks because it's very French heavy, and it's very last 10 years with some notable exceptions, and it leaves me a bit light on stuff that is in, you know, according to this guy's plateau of drinking. And so really you've just got to keep curating, keep caring, and keep laying down wines for the future. It feels good at the time when you're maybe not that into wine to just skip it and go, that's not for me, or I don't have that much money, I'll just miss that year. But it just pays to keep clipping away, because it's much harder to claw it back and buy old wines. It's going to cost you more money in the long run. And by the way, the stuff that you do buy will never really go down in value. Again, right under the camera there, the Ridge Montebellos, I think I probably paid, I don't actually know, but let's say 50, 60 quid a bottle for those in 2012 from the 11 vintage. You know, you couldn't get that for twice the money now. It's well over £100 a bottle. And that tends to be the way, or at least it has been in the last 15 years. Hopefully I'll never have to sell them, but it's probably more importantly the point that I now have wines in my cellar that I can't really afford to buy today, and they're there to be drunk. Hi, welcome back. I know this video is getting long, but I just want to finish this point. I think it's really important. So I know I said towards the start of the video with respect to the advice received from South Africa that I don't like to name names on the video, but I think it's really such profound advice that I want to finish the video in this way. So Andre Brewer, take a bow. Well done for reaching out to South African winemakers to see what they think about the drinking windows for their wines. And it is such valuable and lovely advice that I actually want to just read out some of the email that Andre received from South Africa. Hi Andre, first let me thank you for the support of our wines. Regarding drinking window, that is a really difficult question, depending greatly on your own taste and your preference for older wines versus younger wines. One of the great myths in the wine industry is that older wines are better than younger wines, but I have a more nuanced idea about it. Wine starts with an abundance of fruit and tannin. It gains tertiary flavour over time, but at the expense of the primary fruit and tannin. At some point, it only has the flavours of age, and all old wine tends to taste similar. And then just skipping towards the end of the email, I find that our Cabernets tend to start drinking really well 5 years from vintage, hit a peak at 10 to 15 years, and will continue drinking well for another 10 years as long as the storage is correct. I was reading a book recently about London during the bombing of World War II. They were describing the wines that Winston Churchill ordered for state dinners during that time. The reds were mostly classed growth Bordeaux, served at 13 to 14 years. That sounds about right. I hope this answers your question. Best regards. And the email was from a gentleman, I think he originated in America and moved to South Africa in the late 80s, if I'm not wrong. Best regards, Jose Conde. I've probably mispronounced that, but he is the winemaker at Stark Conde Vineyard in Stellenbosch. Great makers of Shiraz, South African Shiraz, and as you heard, South African Cabernet. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you've learned a bit about wine drinking windows, and you can of course experiment with that. I hope your cellar matches those drinking windows better than mine does. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, subscribe. If you want to be notified of the next video, hit the bell. And I hope to see you back in the tasting room, the cellar, outside or up here in the office again very soon.